Chapter 46 Loch Sage, Embuaal. The mesmerization that strikes me by Jai's closing sentence overwhelms me, and that utterance of two syllables crowds my mind, chanted perpetually to infinitude. I cannot sidestep or proceed forth from those joined words. They formed an impenetrable wall where no sequence of thoughts can string beyond. Despite my efforts, when I make an attempt to hurdle it, I cannot do thus with sufficient height. When I try to circumvent the border, I find no end. When I think to burrow under and past it, I find that its depth matches its height. When, with all of my strength, I collide with this abstract fortress, it jounces me backwards, reverberating and echoing its immovable message. Loch Sage. Tiamatu's frigid irises and dark pupils rise, straining against the compression of his snowy brows and those frost-tipped curtains of his eyes. I cannot quite decipher what manner of emotion he harbors amongst the docking that is his supposed supremacy when met with those words. What is it that he feels when those frequented vowels and consonants are rearranged to pronounce the rare title of a being whom he had waged his victory, no, rather, his freedom on, no longer existing? And so he, that is deathless, has frolicked too carelessly into a conundrum fit for his demise. Hubris, it seems, is a self-inflicted impediment for both mortals and immortals alike. Yet, I am without perplexity in knowing that Yolum is the sole anomaly, and my knowing thus is gradually relayed by my rediscovered proximity with my ancestors, including those before Parias, and they by God's grace. What a pleasant yet odd sensation this is! The gradual, unspoken revelations that pour into me come by the drip, collecting in the chalice of my heart until abundant enough to be gulped, and then again this course repeats. Shall I ever be full of him? Perhaps, perhaps not. No matter really, so long as I continue to drink of him. Jai points to the east, to a former plateau which has been diminished into a modest island still over sea whilst holding my baffled gaze.
This is where I shall begin. Once I have planted and called forth the cloning command, Tiamatu will be free of my authority. And, child, you shall do all that you must to see to it that he does not interrupt me.
She instructs me, graciously and affectionately. The teacher of my teacher entrusts her life and that of the world's to me. Ought I be nervous or flattered or both?
It would aptly benefit you to heed her instruction. I saw no inkling of an indication which would allow for such a favorable circumstance to befall you. What fortune!
Head bowed, the pale god's tone is more ominous now than ever before. He bursts into laughter before proceeding.
Prior to this, my victory was as promised as the conclusion of reading a book in which I've been aware of the ending to before I ever turned to that first page. Now,
he pauses to grin, baring his teeth, a misty cold slipping between them.
It is a game, because now the prospect of my failing is no longer nil.
The chimera of an emotion I was attempting to deduce earlier is what I may best term a maniacal invigoration. That is the nearest I can come to understanding Tiamatu's skittish excitement. After studying the kneeling immortal, Jai turns to face me again.
You've done well to survive this long, but his intent to kill has risen to that of a treed and surrounded beast. He is threatened, and he has grown desperate.
Ha! Foolish hag.
Tiamatu flares insecurely. She is right. He is far more dangerous in this state. Also, he is likely to be increasingly unpredictable. Jai, how do you know this will work? How did you come to possess the Loch Sage's essence? Through his corpse? No, it would be long eroded by now. I speak frantically enough to answer my own question.
I sapped his surviving essence from an heirloom that he had passed down his line through the generations. I uncovered records detailing his lineage and where to begin my investigation at a library in the old capital of Krumar. From there, my short quest was nearly frictionless. It required some courtesy and a pinch of persuasion to convince his young descendant to allow for me to simply hold the heirloom for but a moment. There was a growing amount of salient evidence written across all of the natures of Oma to assure to the child that what I spoke of was true.
I nod, accepting the plausibility of her story. One last thing. Payman said he had come across survivors against all of the inordinate odds of this disorder. Can you support his claims? Have you seen any in your travels? I do not press her to ask how she herself withstood the worldwide tsunamis. It is likely that she was already upon the Flutora's back during the flood. Her wise eyes refuse any deflecting from me. They avoid no interrogation.
Many have perished, but both the Omani and the Tamas are strong and capable races. Once we've put this threat to rest, we will rebuild and flourish again.
Detailing my setting, we stand upon a few kalama of crumbled dust, dirt, and wilted shrubbery, encompassed by roaring black waters and below a saddened and grotesque sky. Day and night have completely blurred into one another. We have arrived at our closing struggle and his final frontier. We must draw a border that he shall never cross. Jai crouches over a patch of soil in the center of the duping island. Tiamatu yet kneeling where we left him. Twice now, he's been brought to his knees by the very mortals which he claims to reign over in ascendancy, reason, and mortality. Once by Gravata, Payman, and the army, and now again by Jai. God or not, he carries pride, perhaps especially so as an ancient deity. We've at the very least humiliated him, a triumph in its own right. How much time do you require? I ask Jai as she finishes smoothing the dirt over the buried seed and patting it down for safe measure.
2, perhaps 3 minutes.
Her answer strikes me. That's it? Before I could display my skepticism, or rather my astonishment, she continues.
But, as I've already claimed, Tiamatu is excitable now. He is paranoid and thus anxious to kill us. His intent for murder boils madly due to the revelation that he can be locked away once more. He was certain before. No longer does he foster such concession, and this uncertainty may prove lethal. A minute of defending against something like that could very well feel as though an eternity of attempts to deter Sa from dipping and rising. An impossible task. Though, as you've come to mature, you've exhibited time and time again that which is impossible is only so until it is not.
Her intuition tells me what I already know but refuse to acknowledge as truth. She is right. I have done things I never thought feasible, felling legendary foes, battling champions, and taming mythical beasts. I have traversed nearly the whole of Oma, collected all of Parias' artifacts, and carried the heavy burden of the key up thousands of steps to Tiamatu's seal. I have denied death its demand for my body and gained the trust and respect of the most revered Tamas. If quelling this god is the next and perhaps final incursion, a feat greater than all before it, I welcome it.
Once I've begun imbuing my command, Tiamatu will be released from his confinement. He will make haste to slaughter us. Are you prepared for him?
She asks, intently peering into the ajar casements of my spirit as to weigh my answer against the resolve I hold inside. I am, I tell her, my eyes fierce, stance assumed and my guard firm. As am I. Payman graces our presence once more. I have decided that I will fight. No, rather, I will defend Jai to the extent of my capabilities. There are other able hands seeing to the rescue and salvaging of survivors. I return a nod to him.
Then let us begin.
Her forehead sparks a controlled umatic flame that she places flat over the patch of soil in a humble bow, blanketing the seed with the ethos of her soul.
Command, re-become.
The tranquil surge of from Jai to the seed replaces and vanquishes the force pinning Tiamatu in place. He makes haste, wasting no fraction of the signaling moment. The immortal rises from his kneel, extending his arms outward and high. The grasping waves reform, puncturing through the waters which froze from his lingering essence whilst he was halted. Pillars of ice shoot from below once again. A flurry of chains gush from his arms, shoulders, back, and chest. Tormented and disturbed spirits spout from his skin, clawing their way free from his pores. The liquid hands thread in and out of the Black Sea. The pillars curve sharply at the tips, aiming their jagged ice. The chains wave and float in preparation. His pupils ignite into dancing flames with an appetite for all that chance to cross into their purview. The pale god becomes as the capital and epicenter of destruction. The elements of water and ice, the material of undying metals, along with the anguish of flailing spirits, all helix and twirl around Tiamatu in a tendril of acrimony. His demonstration is a menacing spectacle of intertwining horrors. Payman throws his arm back, from which he channels a dense array of braiding vines and branches to shell Jai against what is to come. I prepare my astral blade and star reader, equipping them both for the first time concurrently. In addition, I summon my versatile command, layering on mask, weight, and track to my stage 3 mimic Drakin. Realigning my Drakin's eye view behind and above Tiamatu to complement my track command, I gain an absolute awareness of all things and at all times possess it. Payman's splint will hold. My lame wing is my only hindrance. I must supply a consistent funneling of to my souls and adjust for the terrain as I move to and from water, ice, and land.
Reject your imbecilic aspirations. They are not to ever perspire.
Tiamatu clamors from afar as he whips his arms to a double point, directing the lawless discord surrounding him and beckoning them to his calamitous will. The roaring hands of the sea scamper across his body, more than half of which are met with an eruptive, blooming forest of Payman's design. The summoned woodlands grow into natural walls and dams colliding with the ocean's reaching wrath. A beguiling rebellion. As for the remnant half of his assault, it is I who make the counter, dashing towards its many arms, spinning my combusting flail and holding steady my long blade. In the midst of this, I am confronted with the wailing souls using the waves as cover to flank. I make slight work of the first of them with the astral longsword. The chains enter the fray, and before long the colossal pillars of ice extend their pikes down upon our tiny island. With all that is transpiring in concert, a single mistake could cost us this war. The totality of my focus is in this battle, yet within it is severely divided amongst avoiding chains, spirits, waves, and ice, all whilst protecting Jai. Payman's cultivated defense, partnered with my parrying and deflections, is scarcely enough to keep alive. Tiamatu advances, marching through the disarray as we are forced to deter his onslaught. Each successive attack makes way for the next. The velocities of each one of them differ, making timing his rhythm and reacting to it all the more challenging. His mode of attack has transitioned entirely into chaos. There is no composed order to his strategy as there was when his primary aim was to prove his eminence. The pale god is unhinged, and thus Jai was reasonably wary that he'd behave in such a manner. Again she was right. Death is relentlessly thrown at us. The spurious shoreline has been decimated. Beneath our footing, the ground rumbles. Payman provides an immediate antiphon once he has discerned that Tiamatu breeds turbulence below the islet in order to crumble and sink it. The Alpha General thrusts his feet into the crust. Sprawling tubers burst from his ankle bones toward the deepest layers below, shrouding and reinforcing our foundation in a net of roots, binding together pieces that would otherwise come apart. The pale god steadies his approach, as does his assault, halting their motions. Chains, glaciers, waves, and souls ominously ossify all at once and remain thus in great anticipation. The fringe immortal puts his right hand forth as one would to pluck a low-hanging fruit from a tree. In this moment of abrupt silence, Tiamatu pulls his ruthless fusillade into this imaginary fruit. Giant pillars, sea, chains, and souls alike skew, bend, and spiral into a sphere of intense pandemonium, powerless against the pull of space and time. He reclaims and tames the chaos which he had unleashed. Horrified by the sheer power emanating from that which he clutches, there is no process of thought. My body and voice lend themselves control as I dash over to Payman and Jai to warn of its magnitude. "We have to brace ourselves! It'll take every dribble of will and we have to buffer Jai from that which he holds." Payman appears equally as terrified as I. Despite this great fear, he nods in agreeance. Once more, I must conjure a new command during battle. This is as sufficient a scenario as any to do thus. There is nothing in my current arsenal capable of withstanding the scrutiny of Tiamatu's unnatural fruition. I am not accustomed to bearing shields, as I prefer my mask ability. Yet, I am tasked with guarding more than myself in this instance. It must be grand. It need be a shield imagined and imbued with a flushing stream of my that can uphold its form and flow until the conclusion of any impact. I shall dub it Command, Shield of Constellation! To the cosmic nature of my the very nature that grants my bow, sword, and flail form, I implore it to do my bidding in a new way. I drop into a kneel with my right knee digging into the ground, aimed at the god, and my left heel planted, squaring into a corner with my other foot. From this base, my right forearm and fist is raised before me in the position one assumes when bracing their latched shield. I produce the cosmic defense, an astral great shield, initially covering the span of my own body. I enlarge it, doubling its scope, then I triple that, and again I double it. Each successive phase, demanding a wider funneling of my It is now large enough that both giant paymen may find sufficient cover. This is my fortress to you, a concave screen of stars, a hull against the troubling waters, a filter against the damning noise. Tiamatu plucks the sphere of calamity from the tree of his habitus, floats it to his upwards pointing and extended index, lassos it around himself in a mighty spin, and finally gestures his mark, Jai. The frenzied ball obeys with the ardor of a meaning-deficient servant, blind to any purpose except that which is given to it by its master. How something no larger than a vast nut can produce a momentum of infinite proportions and simultaneously move with a velocity imperceptible to my eye at the height of my keenest transformation, how something like that can be permitted to an existence where it has come under the domain of an ill user, how something like that can become of this world is beyond my ephemeral comprehension. Of course, these are my thoughts after it has long since traversed the space between us. Its shoot was but for a mere fraction, of a piece, of a crumble, of an echo of a moment. The impact, though yet to breach my defenses, thumps the air from my lungs. But I hold. Payman enlists 2 pillars of braided trunks against the shield's corners to buttress its slanting posture. Still, we slide gradually in reverse, the weight of the assault compressing the freshly produced organic columns. Its force is too great. Employing my free hand, I conjure my Star Eater and use it as a hook and claw, anchoring it into the crust through and in front of the shield. The persistence of the woeful orb is unyielding, but we hold. Through combined effort, we are no longer forced backwards. However, this has only shifted the burden and strain to a focal point. The shield is cracking. A few small fragments fracture and break from it. Its center chipping away with each incessant second. The noise of calamity fills the turbulent atmosphere, drowning out our war cries and pleas to whosoever may lend us aid. Throughout the acute tumult of this deific contention, the wild gales pull the ruby stone from my garments, laying it upon the ground before me. It glows, as it once did, beaming its faint red light and composing the scarlet portal. To all of our astonishment, a brutally beaten and burnt, but steadfast Eviar limps through, his senses recollected. I had forgotten entirely that I yet had custody of this stone. Not that I would have thought to use it, or that Eviar was somehow still capable of standing. Nevertheless, here he is. The Tomas General does not for a second turn to look at us. His glare is clinched onto the god with his vision only obscured by the transparent shield and the realm-tearing orb in between them.
This will not hold. The dregs of his blast will be my responsibility.
Eviar's coarse voice and commanding tone cuts through the cacophony, reverberating from the shield's curved contour. I hear him clearly, but I cannot believe what he is saying. Yet, there is no other option presented to us. The shield is on the brink of collapse. Eviar arranges himself to arrest the sphere with just an amma of space between it and him. Our bulwark shatters, the constellations within it scatter without restriction, and the sphere of calamity scurries into Eviar's palms. He clutches the erratic spin, but its impetus contorts his hands, breaking his fingers and ripping his flesh. Eviar endures the grind, feeding his limbs from fingertip to elbow into the devouring orb until ultimately gathering the required strength to direct its course upwards and out from our world. The immense velocity along its path craters the dreary envelope of Tiamatu's essence, pulling it from our world and revealing the true sky and everything that lies beyond once again. Our amputated savior stumbles forth and faints into a well-deserved slumber. The pale god baffles.
I have underestimated you twice now,
He says, awestruck at the resting general. A brilliant flash detonates behind Payman and I. It came from within Jai's nest of bark, vine, and thorn. Payman uncovers the layers, revealing the source of it. Jai staggers, as exhausted from her labor as we are from ours. Next to her, the almond tree is divided, and from within it, in a parted deep blue and yellow gold hood and regal robe, worn long and loose, rises a new figure from his crouched rebirth. His arms, folded behind his back in a poise of an experienced scholar. His identity, clandestine by way of a perpetual and serried fog within his garb, a held mist without leakage. Only his prowling saffron eyes glint through the wondrous haze. Tiamatu's countenance exhibits a helplessly discharged incredulity, an unspoken language that has slipped from him against his will, a telling of his weakness and trepidity.
Let it be known that the newborn mimic of the late Loch Sage, Embuaal, sealer of gods, has risen,
Jai announces.